introduction to why you might want to consider actually applying to Cambridge. We are a world-class institution. I believe we were ranked #1 on many of the the complete subject guides to university. We're usually up there within the top 10. Also, depending on whether or not the American universities like to put themselves first, we tend to be quite high up on the list across the UK, but also the world. And as a result, we really attract people from all over to come to our university, and it makes it a really exciting, dynamic, international place to do your studies. You really do become more of a global citizen, let's just say that, when you come to Cambridge. But on top of offering you that really world-class education with these top experts in their subjects, they are the ones who'd be leading your classes, who you'd be having that personalized supervision with, that one-on-one, two-on-one, three-on-one teaching style, what we call the supervision style system. We also have a really, really supportive environment. And at Cambridge, you will be provided with not only a pastoral tutor, but also on top of your academic tutor, but also sort of a well-being team that are there to support your needs outside of academics. And the pastoral tutor as well is really important because it's someone that you can go to if you have any issues at all that are not related to your subject, to make sure that we can get those sorted, because obviously having an all-rounded view of your life at university is really important. Having some work-life balance is important, and we know for a fact that obviously if you're sort of struggling in other parts of your student life, that will have a knock-on effect to your academics. So at Cambridge, we take that really, really seriously, and we try and make sure that we cover all bases by providing you with that supportive environment. On top of that, there is a lot of funding as well, so not only for kind of things to do with your pastoral well-being, but also to create a fulfilling student experience. We have so many clubs and societies. I believe there's over 500 different ones across the whole university: sports, arts, theatre, music, whatever you can think of, there usually will be a club to do it. And if amongst all of those different clubs and societies at college level, so in these small little communities, or at university level, you find that there isn't something for you, you can go to the university or the college and propose to set up your own society. I know at Homerton alone, we have some really quite rogue ones, including the Vampire Appreciation Society, where they all like to sort of consume vampire-based media. It can be just as random as that, or, you know, the Homerton College hockey team, whatever it's your fancy. And as we say on here, Cambridge is one of the top 10 UK universities most often targeted by Britain's leading graduate employers, according to the graduate market in 2021. In terms of explaining how the collegiate university works, so you may have heard of the term colleges, which is the term that specifically applies to this type of system that we have here at Cambridge, but also Oxford and some other UK universities like Durham and York. Essentially, a college is a bit like a mini campus and a bit like a schoolhouse that you might belong to, where you'd spend the majority of your time socializing, living, eating, sleeping, etc. And the role of a college really is to admit its students. So if you were to apply to Cambridge, say for HSPS, you would apply directly to Homerton College for HSPS, and they would be the ones making the decision as to whether or not you'd receive a place at Homerton, at the University of Cambridge. They're also responsible for providing you with academic and pastoral care, as well as accommodation, dining and recreation. And they usually are the ones who'd be organising your small group teaching. So the academics associated with your college, what we call director of studies, are the ones who'd be organising the way that your modules would line up, which academics you'd go to for your supervisions outside of sort of internalised faculty teaching. And therefore, they're really important for, I guess, your whole journey throughout Cambridge for your particular subject. Colleges also provide you with specific facilities for academic studies. So typically there will be a college library. For example, at Homerton, I know we have a 24-hour library that is very big, and a lot of students like to use to do their studies regardless of what subject they study. There's also the university-wide libraries. I believe the Central University Library is a copyright library, so they should have a copy of pretty much every book that's been published in the UK and beyond. But there's also so many different libraries out there that you can go along to, especially if it's a departmental library. If you're doing HSPS, you probably would be part of multiple different departments, so you can go and use those. But really, colleges also provide that extra space for academic study. And then the role of the university really is to determine course content, organise lectures, seminars and practicals, etc. Also to set and mark examinations, so you'll sit centralised university exams across all of the different colleges. And then finally, the university is responsible for awarding you your degree. So whatever college you end up going to, whether that is say Homerton or maybe somewhere else like Pembroke or St John's, you still get a degree from the University of Cambridge altogether. And as we said at the bottom, a college is a bit like a mini campus, providing a base for students. And hopefully you can see that nice little picture of the oldest part of Homerton, which is the place that I work at. To give you a little bit more background about Homerton itself as well, so I've liked to included some, semi-nice aesthetic photos of the college because it's very pretty, and we have these beautiful grounds as well as quite modern bits, as you can see in sort of the top right-hand corner. We have that new dining hall that's currently under renovation and won a bunch of architecture prizes in 2022. But just to give you a flavour of what we're about, so we combine both old and new because we are both the newest Cambridge College, although technically we've been around since kind of the 1700s in London. But we are technically the newest college since about 2010, when we were given full collegiate status before we were a teaching college for PGCEs. And we have now got probably the largest and most diverse college community, taking students in all different kinds of subjects. So you wouldn't necessarily apply to a particular college at Cambridge for a specific subject, because you're not going to be surrounded by only HSPS students. You'd be surrounded by physicists, biologists, law students, as well as obviously other people studying your particular subject. So it's a really nice environment to be in, because you really get to get out of just your comfort zone, speak to loads of different kinds of people, interested in loads of different things. But the thing that all unites them at Cambridge is their passion for whatever they're studying. And they might have a few quirky eccentricities, but most of the time they're really hardworking, interesting, passionate people. What makes Homerton also a little bit more unique as a college is that we are very committed to making a positive impact on the world. So we have this quite different sort of program that we run at our particular college that you wouldn't find elsewhere, called Homerton Changemakers. And it's essentially a world-leading development program set up to make sure that with all the great research that's going on in our college, and it makes it a really great place to study, great place to be as a community, but also someone to work at, as is the case for me. When we're making all of these amazing discoveries and creating all this amazing work and developing these theories that are going to be changing the future from studying it at Cambridge, actually, how are we making sure that the things that we're studying, the things we're learning about, is actually making a really positive impact on the world? Well, Homerton Changemakers is there to specifically address that problem. So to make sure that you are actually applying the things that you're learning to, say, doing some charity work, or working within the local community to develop programs, or setting up your own startup, or getting into politics, student activism. There's loads of opportunities to develop through this program. It's not compulsory, but it is one of the great opportunities, one of the unique opportunities that Homerton is able to offer you. And especially as a HSPS student, because it's such a big subject at Homerton, lots of HSPS students will get involved with Homerton Changemakers to kind of put into practice the things that they would be learning theoretically in their subject. A little bit more about Homerton then. So just to give you a brief idea of the history. So as I mentioned, founded in 2010, given full collegiate status in 2010, founded in London in 1768, hence the name Homerton, coming from Homerton, London. We're very close to the train station in Cambridge. We're a little bit further out from the centre, but what it means in practice is that you don't get that same feeling like you're in a fishbowl, because we don't really tend to get tourists looking in your windows, which some of the more central colleges might have to struggle with a little bit more. As a student, the community is very strong because, as I said, because you're a little bit further out the city centre, everyone is sort of on this campus together in the evenings. All the first years would live together in the same block, and it's a really big year group, so you get to meet loads of different kinds of people, and there's enough space for you to make your own group of friends as well. Because we're close to the train station, really direct routes to London, to other parts of the country. And we have over 25 acres of beautiful gardens and grounds, hopefully highlighted in the photos that I've just shown you. Also shown a little bit here in these pictures that I've picked out. In terms of utilities, we have a 24-hour gym. We have sports grounds that are a little bit removed from the college, but we have them relatively close by. You can get there by a very easy bike ride. We have a boathouse for those of you interested in rowing, 24-hour library, a really new modern cafe or buttery, a thriving student bar called the Griff, and a union that is dedicated to running all these great student events for student welfare, etc., etc. But one of the main pulls, I guess, for us in practical terms is that because we have much much of the land outside of the city centre, we are able to actually subsidise a lot of accommodation. So we're able to offer some of the cheapest student accommodation in Cambridge. It's all been either rebuilt or refurbished within the last 10 years. And we've basically got more ensuite rooms with internet access than any other college in Cambridge. So not only is it some of the cheapest accommodation, it's also pretty much all of it is ensuite. I've also included a picture here of our principal. So this is Lord Simon Woolley. He is the first Black man to be a principal or president of an Oxbridge college, and he's a really inspiring figure. He works in all sorts of great programs and activism in politics. So he's very keen to get the college involved in making a greater impact on wider society. But he has got all sorts of cool connections, and sometimes he'll invite some of his connections to the college. So in recent years, we've had Naomi Campbell come and visit. We've had Stormzy come and visit, and as well as King Charles. So it makes it quite a fun place to be, because you never know who's actually going to turn up at the college. So financial support at Homerton, again, an important thing to mention, because people often worry about Cambridge being much more expensive than other places in the country. And whilst it is true that Cambridge as a city is relatively expensive, actually the financial support that the university is able to offer you and the specific college is able to offer you does make it a lot more affordable than other universities, because you only have to pay rent whilst you're in residence for the term time. So that's only 8 weeks at a time. When you go home on the holidays, because you're living in college-owned accommodation, you do not have to pay any rent, so that can work out a little bit cheaper. There's also the Cambridge Bursary Scheme, which is able to subsidise extra money as well for anyone whose household income is around £62,000 and below in terms of student finance. There's lots of extra grants and scholarships across the university, across different departments as well, that you can make use of as a student. And specific colleges will also have their own funding. So at Homerton, we have individual grants and scholarships you can apply for. We offer music and travel grants, as well as student representation awards, internship grants, in case there are any internships or particular work experiences that you'd like to take part in but are unable to find the funding to do. We can help you with that. There's also the College Hardship Fund for those who might find themselves in an unexpected financial situation. So the college is still looking out for you, even in those times of hardship as well. And on top of that, there is support for young carers and care experienced students. Just to give you a quick reminder overall of the application process. So obviously, the first thing you need to do is choose your course. If you are choosing HSPS, then that would be your course. Then you choose a college or an open application. Essentially, this means that in October, if you choose to apply to Cambridge, you'd either pick Homerton from the drop-down menu rather than, say, just the University of Cambridge. You pick Homerton College, University of Cambridge, or you pick the option for open application, which just basically gives the computer algorithm the opportunity to assign you to a random college. So you'll get no say over which college that is, but the choice is there to either choose or to sort of leave it up in the air for fate to take its course. Then you need to make sure you check your admissions test arrangements, because I believe for most colleges you would have to sit a written test for HSPS, because the tutors like to see that you are able to well, they'd like to see the different ways that you write, not only under time pressure in an exam situations, but also, I guess, with the longer forms of your written work that you have to submit as part of your UCAS application, or later on after that goes in on the 15th of October. You need to send all of that off on the 15th of October. Teacher reference, predicted grades, personal statement, all of that needs to go off before then. And then you'd complete things like the My Cambridge application form with your additional forms. You might have to submit written work or take an admissions assessment. Often these might be online, supervised over Zoom, something like that. And then from that process, if you are successfully selected for interview, these would typically take place in December. And at Homerton, all interviews, apart from maths and music this year, will be online. So bear that in mind as well. Not that it really should make much of an effect on your application, but some colleges might be in person, some are hybrid, and we are pretty much all online. After that, if you are successful, you will find that decision out in January. So I hope that explains the application process in a bit more detail. Hopefully you will know a bit more about that, considering you've already sort of clicked on this video. But yeah, I hope that makes sense. And I see, oh, Marta, you've joined. Brilliant. Thank you. Sorry, I was worried that I was gonna.
That's okay. I was panicking, sending you emails saying I don't have the link. I don't have the link. But then Alex sent me the link, which is why when I turned up, my photo said Alex Williams.
Oh, great. Apologies for that. I resent the link,
That's
but I
okay.
don't think it came through. Thank you so much.
That's absolutely fine. I suspect you probably sent me the link at some point, but my inbox is so full at the moment that I just must have misplaced it. I've put it somewhere else.
No problem.
So apologies on my part.
So we have our attendees here. Just to introduce you, so this is Marta. She is one of the DOSs for HSPS Social Anthropology. If you'd like to say something about yourself before you get started.
Hello, everyone. So I am one of the Director of Studies in HSPS here in Homerton. I am a social anthropologist by training. Well, I started out in history and politics, funnily enough, so that kind of already tells you something about the subject. And then after my first degree in history and politics, I did a master's, a PhD, and all the rest of it in social anthropology. And so I'm now a fellow in social anthropology, and I lecture in social anthropology in the Department of Social Anthropology. And I'm a part of the team in HSPS over at Homerton. I was listening to Sabrina with a great deal of attention because she was doing a great job of introducing the college to everyone. And I was thinking to myself, I would add to that it is actually one of the nicest colleges I've ever been in. And I was a student at Cambridge, and I was at a different college. I'm not going to say which. And I have been a postdoctoral fellow, and I've been a member of other colleges. And Homerton is by far my absolute favourite college that I've ever worked in Cambridge. And I don't say that lightly.
That's
So
really glowing praise. Yeah. So you should take note, everyone. Really take note. Brilliant.
okay,
Marta, are you able to share your presentation?
I'm able to share my presentation. I don't know if this is, I mean, in a way, I'm thinking here. I have two things. One of them is I can speak to the course, but I know that Sabrina has already done some of that. The other one is I thought, well, when I'm asked to say what kinds of things do you look at as a social anthropologist, I always have this moment of complete panic because 100 things come into my mind at the same time. And in the end, what I did was I decided that I was going to talk to you about gift giving and gifts because it's been on my mind a little bit because it's one of the most classical of all the topics in social anthropology. But also it's been on my mind for an obvious reason that might not be obvious to everyone, but it is for me, which is that every time anyone goes and meets President Trump in any diplomatic excursion, there's always a great deal made of the kinds of gifts that get exchanged and what kinds of things might we infer from this exchange of gifts. So I thought that gifts are a really interesting way of thinking about why it is that things that seem completely disjointed and completely disconnected in HSPS, so say international relations and social anthropology, actually come together very nicely in odd ways sometimes and in unexpected ways. Right? And so it depends on what you want me to do first. I can speak to the course first, or I can just do the presentation straight away.
If you could describe the course, that would be really great because I haven't gone into depth about the HSPS course. So if you could do that, that'd be amazing.
So let me, in a way, what I need to do very briefly is share my screen. Let me get it first. First and foremost, I need to.
No problem. Just to say to the attendees as well, so I've just given a brief introduction to Homerton, to Cambridge, and how the rest of this session is going to be structured is that Marta is going to describe a little bit more about the course at Cambridge, and then sort of move on to give you a bit of a taster session, a bit of a taster lecture, and what you might be like to actually learn a bit more about social anthropology. And then at about 6 o'clock, we have a current HSPS student actually joining us, Alex, who is going to be there to answer any questions that you have also about student life, I guess, from more and more contemporary student experience. So at that point, please save your questions for then, because Marta will be able to, I guess, answer a lot more of the academic questions. And then Alex will be there as well to give his perspective too.
And Alex will no doubt be the most useful of everyone that you will speak to because Alex is just about to start his third year and he knows the course inside out. So let me just try to pull this up. For some reason, it's not letting me do it. Okay, where is it? Right. No, it's not letting me do it. It's not letting me open it. But why not? That's the big question. Well, what I'll do is I'm going to share with you share with you a different sort of thing. Prospective students, let me. Apologies for this. I don't know why it's not opening. It is a departmental, a faculty thing, but it should open automatically, but it isn't. So some of you might have already seen my share. Okay, share this. Share. So can you all see it?
I can see that, so I think
Okay.
everyone else can see that as well.
So quite a few of you will have already found this. This is one of the things that you find online when you first think of applying to Cambridge. And what this gives you is just a general sense of other ways in which the course is structured, right? So the course in part 1 in HSPS is structured around 3 main subjects. Those 3 main subjects would be politics, sociology, and social anthropology. The majority of people who apply to study HSPS in Cambridge apply to study either politics or sociology. Very few people, in fact, know what social anthropology is supposed to be, what it is about, etc. Right? Having said that, when you apply to study HSPS, you are expected to take all 3 of them. In the first year, you have to select papers from all 3 of them. So you will select 1 paper from each of them, and you can select a 4th paper either from one of the 3, because both politics and anthropology have 2 separate papers, and sociology at the moment currently has only 1 paper. It's a very big paper. Or you can select a 4th subject. We can borrow a paper from a different faculty. For example, there's some examples there. Biological anthropology, which would be humans in biological perspective, world archaeology, or what we call PBS, which is psychology and behavioral sciences, right? So that's the structure of the course in the first year is such that you are expected to study all 3, to be exposed to all 3, to attend lectures for all 3, and to, by doing so, acquire a grounding in both the 3 main subjects of the course, and understand how they relate to each other, to the point where by the end of your first year, you will be in a position to say, well, I really enjoyed politics and I want to specialize in politics, in which case you would then go on in your second year to study what we call a single track tripos, which is HSPS, single track politics. Or you could do, as many students do, something that we call the joint track. And that often happens because students get to the end of their first year and find that, in fact, they've really enjoyed everything they've studied, or they've enjoyed 2 things and can't really bring themselves to stop studying one of them just then, and so end up choosing to progress onto their second year, doing what we call a joint track tripos, whereby you can combine any of them. You can combine politics with anthropology, politics with sociology, sociology with anthropology, anthropology with sociology, even international relations with anthropology. I think that's the only one that you can't combine with sociology for some reason, but you can do politics and international relations and anthropology. Although, yes. So that would be a joint track tripos. People who do the joint track tripos can continue on in their third year then to do the joint track tripos, or they can once again, by the end of their second year, they can choose to specialize in one of the subjects of the tripos, which is very common. And that is very common partly because when people decide to do dissertations in their third year, that means that they automatically have one of the papers. When you do a joint track, you're doing half of your papers in one subject, half of your papers in the other. You do 4 papers per year. If you choose to do a dissertation, that means that you can only take one other paper in the subject in which you're doing a dissertation. So it is often the case that by their third year, people do end up specializing in one of the areas of the tripos. It's not compulsory. I've had students who don't, but it does often happen. Now, no one is at a disadvantage by doing a joint track. No one is at a disadvantage by doing just a single track. One of the questions I'm often asked is, what is your degree? Your degree will always be a degree in HSPS. It just so happens that inside HSPS you specialized in one of the subjects in the tripos. So this is the basic structure of the department, of the ways in which you would then be organizing yourself in a tripos that is very broad, and that covers a lot of things. Having said that, though it is broad, it's perfectly manageable. The first year is possibly the biggest jump, because you suddenly find yourself studying quite a few subjects all at once and having individual supervisions on a weekly to bi-weekly basis on all of those subjects. I don't know how familiar all of you are with Cambridge, but of course, one of the unique things about Cambridge is that we have this funny way of teaching whereby you attend lectures, but the majority or the bulk of the teaching really happens in what we call supervision settings, whereby you will all be assigned a supervisor that will usually see you in groups of 2 or 3, sometimes individually. Although that's something that tends to happen more towards the third year than towards the first year. And that supervisor will guide you in exploring and deepening the knowledge that you will be acquiring in your lectures. A supervision in HSPS consists usually of a 1-hour discussion with your supervisor, who will be a member of the faculty, or eventually even one of the people who lecture you. They will assign you an essay title that you will be expected to write an essay on. That essay will have been read before the supervision. You will ideally send it to your supervisor with 24 hours or 48 hours sort of notice. They will read the essay, they will comment on the essay. They won't necessarily mark the essay, and that's a huge difference to the ways in which you study when you're in still doing your A levels and your GCSE. So a lot of people come in expecting to be marked on these essays. These essays, they're not summative. The assessment is not summative, it's formative. The idea here is just, we read those essays in order to see how you're doing. We have questions for you. We expect you to then be able to tell us how you came to the conclusions that you came to defend the points that you have made, the argument you have laid out. This is something that in Cambridge happens, as I say, for each subject every 2 weeks, which means that on average, people will write around 3 to 4 essays a term per subject. In the first year, it's a little bit less, it's 3. So you'll be expected to be writing 12 essays in 8 weeks. That sounds daunting, but it's not. And a lot of us these days in particular often say, well, let's do something else instead of an essay, and end up having an interesting discussion, often in a much more creative way, in order to give our students time to breathe, because it can be intense, the workload. So that's one of the ways in which a normal Cambridge term works. And in HSPS does put a lot of emphasis on equipping you to be able to read information, acquire information, research, summarize that information, and make an argument and make something out of that information, report it back, so to speak, at pace, right? That's one of the main transferable skills. One of the ways in which we teach at Cambridge is, as I say, via a combination of lectures and supervisions in the first year. And from the second year onwards, you also have seminars, which are much more interactive, don't require essays. They require that you read the reading lists that you are presented with, sometimes that you watch some films, and that you come prepared to either do a mini presentation or simply to take part in what, for most of us who teach you, is usually a very interesting discussion. The way in which, so I've referred to these essays as formative rather than summative. The way in which assessment works in Cambridge is you take exams at the end of the year, and HSPS is not no different to any of the other subjects. While you write all of these essays throughout the year that you're not receiving a mark for, you get to the end of the year and you have an essay in that subject, which will then be marked. Right, and that will be the piece of marked assessment for the year. A lot of people ask me, why write all of these essays if you're not even getting a sense of how you're doing? And one of the things I always say to my students is that you are getting a sense of how you're doing. At least I hope so. But this is meant to be constructive in a way. There's no point in me telling any student right at the start of their first year, after they've written an essay in a subject they have never done before, that, well, this would be, I don't know, a pass or a fail or whatever it is, right? I'd much rather say, well, let's build upon this. And one of the interesting things about this method that effectively we use to teach people in Cambridge is that by the end of the year, most people will feel, if you've done your essays and if you've attended your supervisions and your lectures, most people will have basically done the revision they need, or they will have the basis for everything they will write in their exam, because these essays will end up serving as revision pieces, right? These are the topics most of my students end up preparing for when it comes to exam time. I'm trying to think about other things, important things to say. I mentioned dissertations earlier on. HSPS is interesting in that you can write a dissertation in any of the 3 subjects that you choose to study. You can also choose not to write a dissertation. What you can't do if you do a joint tripos is write 2 dissertations, right? So in politics, you can write a dissertation that is fully library-based, that is primarily based in secondary sources. It can be a dissertation that is more philosophical. It can be a dissertation that is more practice-based. It can be a dissertation that is more institutional politics, that looks at the institutional side of politics, and so on and so forth. In sociology, you often have dissertations that do a little bit more work. Some can be more quantitative, some can be more qualitative. And in anthropology, you write dissertations that, in writing a dissertation in anthropology, you do something slightly different, which is our students in anthropology usually do field work. So they get a chance to go and do and study any given topic or group of people that they might have become interested in or already be interested in. When Alex joins us later on, you can ask him all about this, although don't overwhelm him, because he's currently doing fieldwork for his 3rd-year dissertation. So that tends to happen over the summer. There's often funding to help out with that period of fieldwork, where you will go and do practical work with people on the ground. Most people tend to do fieldwork in relatively accessible places, but even so, this is something that can be costly, and so people will often need support, and there is support both at the college level and at the departmental level to do that. And the dissertation you write at the end of your 3 years here, usually in anthropology, will draw on that period of fieldwork and will answer questions that obviously go beyond that period of fieldwork and tend to be quite provocative and theoretically interesting, but they're grounded in a concrete case. So that's the structure of the course. Each of the departments has individual subjects that are core papers. In the first year, there is, as I've said, you are required to study at least one of each. There's only a few. From the 2nd year onwards, you have the courses in each department are divided into core papers and optional papers, right? So every year there'll be 2 subjects that you're expected to take from a list of subjects of courses. and those usually involve both more supervision and they tend to cover more ground, analytically, theoretically, in the case of anthropology, ethnographically. And then you have a series of optional papers that address things that can be as disparate as, let me think, cinema and visual anthropology, or politics of the future, and that's in politics, global health and systems of inequality in sociology, right? One of the interesting things with optional papers is that even people who do a single track can borrow an optional paper from one of the other tracks. And what that means is that you'll be doing fully politics, for example, but you happen to have an interest in, say, the anthropology of law, which is one of the optional papers in anthropology. And you will say, well, actually, I'm going to borrow that paper over there, and I'm going to combine that optional paper with all of my core papers in politics. And this can be, and this is something that is also often done by students who move from the first year, where they're doing everything, to the joint track in the second year, and then to the single track, but they still have a foot in the other subject, so to speak. And one of the things I always tell people is, it's okay, you can still borrow the one optional paper that you are interested in studying. So I suppose one of the things to note from this is that there's a great deal of flexibility in terms of how you organize and how you structure your studying in HSPS. There's basic structure to the extent that you have to take the key papers in order to achieve to succeed in this degree. But given looking at the whole of the way an HSPS is structured in Cambridge, in fact, though you have to take 2 core papers every year, aside from that, you're pretty much free to mix and match and to tailor your studies to make sure that you're actually, finding yourself stimulated, and that this is a rewarding and interesting experience for you. Not just that you're not just here, writing essays, regurgitating information, etc., but that you're actually studying something that is both useful and potentially something that will keep you thinking for the rest of your life. And I know that is overly ambitious on my part, but there's hoping. Sabrina, is this, I don't know how long you want me to go on for at this stage.
No, it would be great if, thank you so much for that summary. I think it was really, really comprehensive. It would be great if you could talk a bit about what you mentioned before, your talk about was it giving as a phenomenon?
Gift exchange.
Gift giving, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to do this relatively quickly. Gift exchange is not even what I work on. So this is point one. I've worked on a variety of things, but I've worked on violence in Brazil. My fieldwork primarily was in Brazil. I lived in not very nice places, but also very nice at the same time, and looked at the ways in which certain cities were being reconfigured. This is before the Rio Olympics, and I wasn't in Rio, and the World Cup and all of that. So I have a particular interest in certain things. I was initially looking at violence and at urban space, and since for about 10 years now, I have actually worked primarily in the field of something that's called medical anthropology. Well, at the intersection of the medical and the political, because I'm very interested in mental health, and I've been particularly interested in eco-anxiety and in the ways in which environmental crisis and crisis in general intersects with issues to do with mental health. Having said that, all of that is very interesting to me. That's not what a taster, not quite what a taster, what you would be getting in your first year as students in anthropology in Cambridge. You'd first need to grapple with the basics. And I say this because anthropology in Cambridge is taught in such a way as to allow you to know some very old stuff that you might assume would be boring, but it's not, and it's foundational for a reason. We often find that our students, when they get to the MPhil level, etc., look back at it, and they're, you know, they're studying alongside people who come from Harvard and from Princeton, and that they know more about anthropology and they understand how to put arguments together better because they've done all of this old stuff. So with that in mind, when I thought a taster lecture on what, I thought I could go I thought of two particular things I wanted to focus on. Both of which are foundational themes for anthropologists. One of them is gifts, or I'm going to refer to this as gifts, but in fact, yes, gift giving, right? The other one would be kinship, and particularly what anthropologists have been working a lot of, which is care. While I was tempted to do care because I think it's interesting and because it actually intersects with some of the stuff that I've been doing in terms of medical anthropology, I realized very quickly that gift giving is interesting because it speaks to particular approaches to the political economic domain that sometimes are obscured by the ways in which we have a tendency to think about the economic domain as this very rational, very quantitative sphere. So I started with about 100 things, but I've narrowed it down to gifts. And what I want to do is I'm going to do something that's very anthropological, which is I'm going to start with a story. It's not an ethnographic story. It's a story about the first encounter between European settlers in North America and Native Americans. As the story goes, when European settlers arrived to North American shores, they were presented with gifts by the Native American population. The Native Americans were very excited and expected gifts in return, but none were forthcoming. The Europeans, it's not just that they were mean, it's that they believed they owed nothing in return. And they believed they owed nothing in return because in their minds, gifts ought to be free. Now, that ought there points to the moral nature of this statement, right? The Native Americans, in turn, were really annoyed because they believed that gifts initiated what anthropologists have called cycles of social exchange. And they felt insulted by the visitors who would go so far as to outright refuse to accept the gifts in the first place. So, this story is interesting for anthropologists for a number of different reasons, right? One of the things here has to do with the fact that the story is pointing towards a misunderstanding. But that misunderstanding reveals something about the different functions and the meanings attributed to gift giving or to gift exchange by different groups of people. The second thing why this story is interesting for anthropologists is that in paying attention to the two seemingly diametrically opposed views of what gift giving is, we start to realize that actually the opposition between the two points to what they have in common. And that's a paradox, but it's a paradox that has been important to anthropology from the beginning of the 20th century, and that has been particularly important when it comes to the ways in which other scholars in other areas use anthropology. So what they have in common, obviously, here is that there are rules to the ways in which people give gifts. There are expectations concerning the returning of gifts, and gift giving strengthens social ties, regardless of whether it does so individually or collectively. Now, we only have a few minutes today, and I'm very mindful of that. So I want to look at some of the key, using this story as a starting point, I want to look at some of the key themes that have emerged in the study of gift exchange. An important first distinction is to do with this thing that I've said at the end, which is whether one looks at gifts from the perspective of the individual person, that's a Western-centric model, or as collective gifts. The idea of the individual gift is related to the rise of individualism, and it is related also to the expansion of a capitalist market economy. There's no point in pretending that this is necessarily a universal way of thinking about gifts, because it's not, because the idea of the individual is not a universal idea to begin with. Collective gifts, on the other hand, have been a major part of systems of social exchange all over the world. And collective gifts are interesting because they create sociality through a sense of indebtedness, right? So that's one of the reasons why anthropologists are interested in gift giving. The fact that gift giving engenders or originates debt. And this is something that an anthropologist called David Graeber looked at quite extensively. And part of his argument was that, well, actually, in creating debt, gift giving also is the beginning of an economic system, of a complex economic system. So collective gifts then have often captured our attention because of what they can tell us about the societies we study. A striking feature of this is to do with the fact that in systems of gift exchange, the circulation of gifts is obligatory, and it happens among the same group of givers and recipients. So where am I getting this idea from? This idea was initially elaborated by an anthropologist called Malinowski, who was one of the most important figures of early anthropology. In fact, he was one of the first people to define what ethnography and field work are. Malinowski was a difficult and controversial figure. He was a British anthropologist of Polish descent. He had been born in Poland, and during the First World War, he ended up being called an enemy of the state, and he was stuck in the Trobriand Islands, which is now Papua New Guinea, and he was stuck there for 4 years. And so he proceeded to study, to just become interested in what the people around him were doing, and to study what the people around him were doing. And one of his major contributions at the time is that he noticed that the Trobrianders had this incredibly elaborate system of gift exchange that was puzzling because they were exchanging things that seemed to be of no value. So this system of exchange that he came across in the Trobriand Islands, modern-day Papua New Guinea, was called the Coolering. The Coolering was a form of ritualized intertribal exchange whereby big men, and by big I mean men of prestige and power and status, would exchange red shell necklaces and white shell armbands in both a clockwise and a counterclockwise way. So they traveled in canoes between the islands, right? Exchanging these gifts, these strange things, these armbands and these necklaces, but with predefined partners, right? So exchange partners, gift exchange partners. This is all done in a closed circle. These trips took ages, really serious affairs, right? And it seems to fulfill no purpose. And Malinowski was completely baffled by this. And why are these people doing this, right? The gifts that were exchanged were made exclusively for the exchange. The gifts had names, the gifts had identities, the gifts had histories. The people who had previously traded them were known, right? So there was a sort of a memory to these gifts. The exchange relationship itself was also interesting because it lasted for the whole duration of a person's life. So the gifts of necklaces and armbands were always flowing among fixed partners. Very importantly for Malinowski, though the Coolering seemed to do nothing for the economy of the islands, and this is why being there for 4 years it was important to him. In fact, he realized that each cooler voyage also involves the inter-island trade of many other objects. So the coolering both reflected and seemed to do something for the economic system in the region. In a way, we can say that these gifts served socio-political functions while forming an important part of the local economy. They shaped the economic behavior. They made the world go around. So one of the reasons why early anthropologists were particularly interested in this had to do with what they perceived to be an essential contrast with contemporary. So today's understanding of individual gifts, right? We think of individual gifts as non-obligatory, as having no strings attached, especially not specific expectations of return gifting, right? Of compulsory return gifting. But early anthropologists quickly came to the conclusion that something else could be inferred from this, namely that perhaps that there are as many obligations hiding behind modern altruistic gift giving, and that perhaps that is no bad thing. And part of the reason why that is no bad thing is because the expectation of reciprocity engenders a relationship, a social relationship, right? That social relationship, so this is the principle of reciprocity. Every exchange of gift or every form of gift giving engenders debt or generates debt. But that debt is no bad thing, because that debt is what keeps a relationship going. So that's a functionalist approach to gift giving. I am mindful that would be the beginning of a lecture on the gift, but I am mindful of the fact that it's 6 o'clock. So I don't know if whilst I was speaking, you could see the PowerPoint.
No, I think you were showing the course structure page.
The course structure. What I'm going to do is I'm going to allow everyone to have access to the PowerPoint. I stopped right at the beginning. I would like to ask, I mean, if you're interested in this, of anyone who's been listening to me, to think about what kind of purpose might the gifting of a Ukrainian soldier's golf club serve in the exchange of gifts that happened between, for example, President Zelensky and Donald Trump just last week, or just this week, in fact, 3 days ago, right? And I would like to ask you to think about why it is that that diplomatic gift giving, what kinds of purposes might diplomatic gift giving serve, and what kinds of things about power and the relation between different nations might we be able to infer, for example, from the ways in which gift giving occurs between heads of state, right? So.
Yeah, thank you. That would be really interesting. I've realized people won't, fortunately, we don't really have a function on this particular webinar to have the chat function going just because of things. However, I guess if anyone has some really keen thoughts, they can pop them in the Q&A box. So
I kept on expecting to see hands.
Yeah,
that was very disconcerting.
No, unfortunately, that's just the format of this particular webinar. But obviously, if you do also have questions afterwards, I'm sure I can sort of forward them on to Marta as well. So hopefully, so I can see Alex is coming and going, trying to join, which might mean that I don't know if there's an issue with 2 people joining from the same link, perhaps, but I could be wrong about that. But if anyone has any questions, could you please pop them in the Q&A box now? So there should be at the bottom of your screen. Oh, there we go. Brilliant.
Hi, Alex.
There's the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. If you click on that and just start sort of type, if you've literally anything about Cambridge, HSPS, social anthropology, could ask Alex some questions about his fieldwork, as mentioned before. But in the meantime,
I'm sorry, I threw you under the bus. I mentioned fieldwork.
But in the meantime, Alex, could I get you to sort of introduce yourself and I guess talk a little bit about your fieldwork, if you'd be as kind as doing that?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, hi everybody. Sorry about the slight technical glitches. But yeah, I'm Alex. I'm going into my third and final year of HSPS, specializing in social anthropology. So I've done just entirely anthropology from my second year, and I intend to do the same in my third year. So yeah, I mean, I kind of went into the degree thinking that I was going to do um, anthropology. I'd heard about it through a friend of my sister's. Um, and she just seemed very passionate about it. And I was interested in the way it kind of drew a lot of different themes together, sort of environmental stuff and talking about climate change. That was kind of my key interest at the time. So that's kind of what inspired me to get into it. So yeah, went into HSPS with an intention to do anthropology and kind of stayed fairly close to that the whole time. So as I say, I'm going to my third year at the minute. And the idea is, I mean, I don't know how much you've covered this already, Marta, but in your at the end of your second year, you have come up with a dissertation proposal, and you spend the summer of your second year preceding preceding your third year, doing fieldwork for that, and it's about sort of 3 weeks or so. So my current project is focusing on this organisation called the Westway Trust, which is a sort of community-led space in West London, kind of around the sort of North Kensington area. Um, and I'm looking at kind of like community level politics. And sort of in the midst of that, at the minute, I'm sort of about to go off and do a chunk of time there, kind of talking to people and hoping to do a bit of participant observation. But it's it's a really amazing opportunity to be able to essentially create your own dissertation and create your own sort of project and specialize in pretty much whatever it is that you want to specialize in. So yeah, I mean that's kind of where I'm at the minute. Basically just waiting on the next round of fieldwork and sort of looking forward to third year, I'd say.
Sounds pretty positive. So we've got yeah, one question which I think Marta's answered already, which was just about clarifying whether or not students have to write 3 to 4 essays per term or 12 essays per term. And unfortunately, I believe it is going to be the latter term, so 12 essays per term.
Yeah.
It is the latter, but Alex, fewer essays in the second and third year than in the first.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, first year is just so broad that you kind of have to do to cover the content. You kind of have to do that number of essays, and yeah, it's a big step up from A level, and it's definitely overwhelming to start. That's there's no shying away from that. But yeah, in second and third year, it definitely eases off, and also it's you find the essay writing process just a lot easier because it's you just get used to it. It's really kind of just a yeah, kind of building up that instinct for it, I guess. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So it seems like everyone's quite shy and suddenly has had all of their questions answered, I guess, by this great presentation that Marta was doing. But I guess unless someone sort of randomly sort of writes a question now, Alex, do you have any sort of tips, I guess, for well, what did you feel like helped you when you were an applicant? If you can think back to that, thinking about applying for HSPS, how did you feel like you made your application more competitive? And obviously, Marta, what do you feel like you really look for really strong candidates and things like interviews? And I think that's something quite helpful for everyone to know.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can say for myself that I actually found the application process actually really enjoyable in a weird way, just because you're kind of presented with this question of like, okay, who am I as sort of as a learner, and like what kind of stuff do I want to learn, and what kind of makes me tick, and what you know what sort of excites me academically. And like I remember hearing like just I think it's from just like sort of general kind of information that I heard like on YouTube or whatever. But the gist I got from about the application process was like they want to hear how you think. It's not necessarily what you know, it's like how you think and how you like process information, and what you can kind of say about the world. And so like using that as a starting point might be, it was helpful for me. It might not necessarily be the best thing for everyone, but it's certainly helpful for me in terms of figuring out, okay, these are my interests, and this is how I'm going to kind of explore those interests in, I mean, I looked at a range of things in my application. I kind of I went to a few museums. I kind of talked about sort of things I'd read. I mean, you know, with anthropology, that you can't study this at A level, or it's very rare that you'll get the opportunity to study it at A level. So no one's expecting you to, you know exactly what anthropology is. And you know, I'm a second year, and I still couldn't not give you an answer. You know, when people say what's anthropology, I'm like, you know, it's you have to unpack it a lot, right? So, I'd say figure out, okay, what you know, if you're coming to Cambridge, you probably want to sort of make an impact in some kind of way, whether that's in, you know, politics, or whether that's, you know, thinking about the environment, or you know, things like that. And think, okay, uh, do I have strong views on this, or do I feel like I can kind of articulate something about this, and um, you know, and then kind of go from there. I mean, maybe anthropology is unique in that you do spend a lot of time in the application process thinking, okay, what do I actually know about anthropology? And chances are it'll be kind of not very much. It certainly was for me. Like I had no idea. So you know that, but using that kind of problem of like, oh, what is anthropology? Or what do I, you know, what maybe applies to what I think anthropology might be? That could be an interesting thing to think about. Um, yeah, sorry, that's a really broad answer and maybe
No,
not very,
it's great.
but
It's very helpful for people to
that was,
hear.
yeah,
And I see that loads of questions have suddenly
Loads
come
of
in,
questions.
great,
big burst.
amazing.
In including one that I believe was kind of what I was aiming a question at Marta about, which was any tips for HSPS interviews in particular, and more from your perspective as a interviewer.
Yeah.
What do you think makes a strong candidate? And then I guess Alex, we could ask, how did you find your interviews? But yeah, we'll start with you,
I'll
Marta.
let Martha go first.
Okay, so Alex is not wrong. We're, I mean, much more interested in how you think than we are in what you know. And that's the case for anthropology, but that's the case. We interview in pairs usually. So you'll usually be interviewed by one anthropologist with one sociologist, or one anthropologist with one political scientist anyway. And we tend to be very quickly in agreement with each other about what we're looking for. And what we're looking for is really, we want to see how you think. We want to see how you think on your feet. It's great that you read lots and that you do lots of things, because the more you are exposed to things around you and the more you explore intellectually, the better prepared you will be for some of the questions that we never throw people curveballs, but I do know that sometimes it feels like that. And I often find myself in this position where I tend to be the good cop in interviews. So I know that I do, because everyone tells me the next year that, oh, it was so good, you were always smiling. I think, well, I was smiling because I was trying to communicate to my interviewees that, look, this feels like a curveball. It is not a curveball. We just want to see how you think, right? Having said that, there are key things in interviews that I think I probably, years ago, if you'd asked me, I wouldn't have been able to put my finger on those. But nowadays, it's very obvious. Often people do something along the lines of start giving an answer, then go off on a tangent, and then never really go in depth into what they meant in the first place, right? That's not great. That usually makes me immediately go, oh, this started well, but where did it go, right? So when you're doing, it's important when you are being interviewed to focus on what you're saying, think carefully about what you're saying, try to listen to yourself say it, and resist the temptation to jump to something that you feel is tangentially related and that you might feel more at ease with, right? Because that's often why we do that. We're going, I think it's this, oh, but this relates to this thing over here that I know I'm interested in. And one of the things I always say is that, yes, but you, even to do that, you still need to go step by step. Tell me why you're going in that direction, right? Tell me a good story. Tell me a good story that shows me how you think, right? I think those are important things in interview. Of course, in interviews, you also have to do other things. Usually, Homerton certainly does this. You will have one interview in which someone will look at your application itself, and you will have one interview in which you might have a little test, a mini something. So in Homerton, what we do is we give people an excerpt, a bit of a text to read. and we have an interview that takes that text as a starting point, right? And that's very common across all the colleges in Cambridge. In fact, I've interviewed for 7 or 8 colleges, and in every single one of them, you would have had something along those lines, right? Much like a maths applicant might have to solve a few problems, right? On a board somewhere. So that's the main thing, is how you think is more important than what you know. Try to take a deep breath and make sure that your answers remain relevant and stick to the point. Don't go off on tangents. Sometimes the tangents are interesting. When the tangents are interesting, the interview will sort of pick up on those tangents. The danger there is that you might have gone off on a tangent that you don't know much about. And if the interviewer picks up on a tangent that they know much about, but you don't, then you're just making life harder for yourself, right? So that's the main thing. The other thing I do say to everyone is that a Cambridge interview is a conversation. So you will find that it's a little bit, I don't know if that was how you experienced it, Alex, but it's a little bit like a supervision. You have these people, academics are weird. We just want to talk about things that we're interested in. We get very excited about talking about things that we're interested in. So we want to see how you cope with a conversation with these people that are strange and just want to talk about things that they're excited by, right? So that's the main thing. And for an interview of the questions that I was kind of looking at, I think there was something else here about interviews that
Yeah, someone asked, I think maybe about if your main focus in HSPS isn't social anthropology, how is that explored during an interview?
I was just going to say that. Well, there's different ways in which we would do that. For the most part, we don't talk about social anthropology as such. We talk about things that social anthropologists might be interested in. So, for example, I'm going to use an example from an interview I did years ago where we were talking about whether emotions are universal or not. Right? That's something that a lot of you will have explored in psychology. Some of you will have explored it in philosophy or in RE. Some of you will have thought about this, right? Anthropology is a strange subject because it brings together so many different subjects, right? And so this idea of whether emotion is universal or not is the kind of thing that tends to generate really, really good conversations, right? That's one example. That's an example. That's a concrete example. If I were to now move from the concrete to the abstract, the main thing is anthropologists really are interested in things that all the other social scientists are interested in. It's when Alex says he still doesn't quite know what anthropology is, it's a really, really hard question. That's the one question that makes every anthropologist panic, right? What is anthropology? What? Why are you asking me this? I'm not. It's not quite like that, but that's almost the reaction that most of us have. One of the things I would say about that is that if you just assume that what anthropologists study is very similar to what the other social scientists study, the difference is that we get at things in funny roundabout ways. So you saw that I talked to you a little bit about gift giving. Really, gift giving for us is a way to talk about the ways in which particular economic and political systems come about, and to direct attention to some of the things that are not said about the ways in which inequality is produced, for example. We know that early theories of gift giving, early theorists of gift giving, like Marcel Mauss, were interested in very similar things, and in fact involved in active conversations with Marx about the ways in which inequality is produced, about the ways in which people are alienated from the product of their labor, or in this case, the ways in which people alienate or don't alienate objects, right? So anthropology is funny because we think in a lateral way, but what we're interested in is really similar to what everyone else is interested in. So if you start with that, you know that in interview, we're not going to be throwing you under the bus. We're not going to be going, oh, tell me what Claude Lévi-Strauss said about anything. Who cares? No, I'm much more interested in knowing, what do you think? Are emotions universal or not? What do you think? Why do you think we give gifts? Why do you think that? What do you think is important in terms of relations of care? Right? Those are the kinds of things that we're really going to be asking you, right? Or is the state, what is the state? How do we think about power, right? Those are the kinds of things that most anthropologists are interested in. They're huge questions, but they're questions that most of us have thought about at some point, right? I mean, no one is ever going to ask you what makes us human. The temptation is great, but no one is ever going to ask you that, right? So you don't have to fear huge questions that you don't have the space to answer. It's more likely to be, well, tell me what you think about this thing, and that's fine. In that sense, you're much more likely to get what have you been reading from a political scientist than from an anthropologist, right? A political scientist, and I should know this because I have interviewed with several of them, is likely to tell you, what do you think Hobbes meant when he said eggs, right? An anthropologist doesn't do that kind of thing. We just really want to see how you look at the world, how you see the world, how you ask questions about things that are, you know, that are interesting and sometimes intractable, right?
Great, thank you so much. Alex, have you got anything to add there? I see there's a lot of questions directed at you, which we can definitely cover next, but do you remember your interviews at all?
I do. I mean, it was a weird experience where I felt very nervous. I mean, obviously, but I think I found that maybe I like consciously or subconsciously did this, I'm not sure. But I remember kind of making an effort, and this is kind of just a sort of like a tactical thing rather than anything like sort of abstract. It was I made kind of an effort to speak quite slowly and sort of try and slow my thoughts down. That was just one thought I had when you were talking about sort of tangents, Martha. I think I found as soon as I spoke quickly, I'd lose my train of thought and then I'd get overwhelmed and stressed and I'd have to work backwards and kind of recover what I was trying to say. So I think if I can offer any tip, it's quite a simple one and it's just try and slow down as much as you can. Especially if, especially if you're someone who thinks quite quickly, or if you've had a lot of coffee, that for me was quite a helpful I think tactic. Yeah, I mean it's still, it's an intense process. But yeah, if you go into it thinking about it as a conversation as well, that was a super helpful bit of advice. I mean the questions I remember were quite broad. I remember, they're always broad, I suppose, but the one I had, I think I had a couple that I can remember. One was like, what is a ritual, or what makes a ritual what it is? And then the other one I had, I think, was about kind of the monarchy and like why we still have a monarchy in the UK. But those are the two questions that the anthropologist interviewing me asked, and they were quite sort of similar to what you were saying, Marta, where it's a sort of kind of what do you think about this thing, and why do you think this might be the case? That kind of sort of frame of question rather than, have you read this and what do you think about this specific author? So in a way, I kind of enjoyed it, despite it, still being an intense process to say the least.
I think there's a few more questions here. I was just going to say about, I'm sorry, Sabrina, were you going to say something?
No, yeah, I was just going to say, someone's asked, Alex, what did you find the most surprising about anthropology at Cambridge?
That's a really good question. I I think I found kind of the breadth of it just quite sort of unbelievable. I think I especially found in second year um, that if you're looking at, say, the anthropology of politics, you're not just going to be looking at anthropology articles, you're going to be looking at, theory. You're going to be looking at maybe some stuff you covered in your first year politics paper. And I think that's something that really struck me in second year. Um, I also just remember being incredibly struck by one lecture that we had, for example, which was all about conservation. It was about orangutan conservation, the Liana Chua article, Martha. And that kind of sort of slightly shattered my sort of worldview a little bit because I sort of came in kind of as a, kind of well, I'm still a very naive undergrad, but a slightly more naive undergrad, thinking, that all these environmental movements were, perfect and had no flaws. But actually, it was talking about this one, sort of project that was led by, well, it was sort of in cahoots with the worldwide the Worldwide Wildlife Foundation, the WWF, whatever it is.
WWF,
Um, yeah, and it was actually critiquing it and saying, okay, so there's these projects to conserve, the orangutan species, which is sort of great, but actually let's critique why is the orangutan such a powerful symbol in the West? Because these projects were happening out in Borneo, right? And so for the actual people who had to deal with the consequences of sort of orangutans sort of coming over and pestering their crops and all sorts, like it was actually kind of a socially quite destructive thing, and also it was kind of a an imposition, I suppose, of a sort of Western organization in this you know in this place that is definitely not a Western country. So that really kind of hit me, and I was like, okay, let's actually think about how we can use anthropology to apply conservation initiatives in a much more sensitive way, or a much more nuanced way that is kind of sensitive to the cultural context that we're operating in. And that I found that was one thing that I maybe didn't quite expect so much. I was surprised by how much my own view about the way we do environmentalism kind of changed. But that was just one lecture. But those are just sort of a couple sort of scatterbrain examples. I'm sure I could give a much better.
It's really interesting stuff, like really
Yeah.
cool. Something that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Or maybe you would, Marta, as a researcher.
Yeah, I was just about to tell Alex, wait until you hear the lecture on robots you're going to have next year.
Brilliant.
Lots to
So,
look forward.
just because I'm aware we're sort of getting towards the end, some quick fire questions just for Alex. I guess you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. What was the subject pathway you took if you did A levels? I guess it was like, what kind of A levels did you do?
Yeah.
And then did you still talk about sociology and politics in your application, for example, in your personal
absolutely.
statement at interview, or was it mostly anthropology?
Okay, so I'll start with the first question. So I did A levels. I did three A levels. I did music, English literature, and politics. I did an AS level in sociology. I was kind of umming and ahhing about whether I was going to do anthropology or do social policy or do sociology. I kind of just settled on social anthropology because I liked the sound of the HSPS course, and then I kind of worked backward from there. So all of my other applications to other places were for either anthropology or social anthropology. Um, and yeah, the second question, sorry, what was it again? Was it probably
Did you
forgotten.
talk about sociology
Did
and
I say?
politics? Yeah.
Well, from what I remember, um, I didn't really talk about sociology explicitly in my application because I was applying to do anthropology at other universities. That's what I centered my application around. I didn't make it strictly a
Mm.
social anthropology application. I was, sort of saying, okay, my interests are predominantly anthropological, but I would like to work this in tandem with policy. So I kind of included a bit about kind of governance and kind of different policy initiatives. So I didn't necessarily stay in the lane of saying this is anthropological because X, and this is why I'm interested in anthropology. It was kind of saying, okay, I'm interested in maybe this way of looking at the world, and I think social anthropology seems like an interesting fit for this, for exploring this way of seeing the world. And I would also like to put that in conjunction with a focus on policy. That's sort of how I ended my personal statement.
Could I add something
Yeah.
to that, Alex? I mean, it's more common for people not to mention anthropology at all in their applications than for
Yes.
people to want to study anthropology. So, and
Mm.
it's fine for most of us. I mean, as an anthropologist, I should probably say that I'm completely used to taking a whole group of students who all want to study politics or sociology, and then every year the numbers fall in the right place. It's kind of about a third of each. It's really strange. So, an application that is exclusively about politics or exclusively about sociology is absolutely fine, right? For HSPS. What I would say is, when you do put the application together, that supplementary box, use it. use that supplementary box to do something that is something my supervisor always used to say, which is that that's the place to be humble and arrogant at the same time, where you go, well, I'm very aware of the fact that that's the one I want to do, and yet I humbly accept that I don't know enough about these other things, because that gets past that first stage. That tells someone reading your application that this is primarily a person of politics or a person of sociology or a person who will do anthropology, but who are open and who understand that that's something that this is a course that will require that they think about the other subjects too, right? So a lot of people don't use the supplementary box, and that always annoys us, because that supplementary box often tells us more than people realize.
And by supplementary box, I presume you mean the box in the My Cambridge application form.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's exactly what
So,
I mean.
yeah.
It's at the bottom. You'll have the big box where you'll write everything about yourself and why you want to study and the brilliant things you've done. And then at the bottom, you'll have any supplementary information. Use it. A nice little paragraph there goes a long way.
Thank you. Someone else has asked, I think it was kind of aimed at both of you. So Alex, you mentioned that your fieldwork is UK based. To what extent are there opportunities to work as an anthropological researcher to study UK society, including online spaces? Thanks. Yeah, both of you can, I think, have
Lots,
A
I
lot.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the moment, I think most people in Homerton are doing dissertations in the UK, right? I mean,
Yeah, I think
there's
that's right.
Lauren.
Yeah, Lauren. Yeah. Oh, and Maria.
Maria, which is she's not
She's
doing it
doing
in the
ours
UK, but she's
online.
doing it about online communities. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there is, and then of course there might be another person doing it in the UK. Well, yeah. So yeah, I think a majority of our students these days do their field work for their dissertations in the UK, partly because it's practical, partly because there's lots of really interesting stuff going on. Yeah. So I hope that answers that question.
Yes, I think it does. What kinds of careers do graduates tend to go into, and how can the multi-track nature of the course differentiate from the careers of those who've taken single subjects?
Lots. It's interesting. The different subjects don't necessarily matter a great deal. For that, I have the statistical information. Anthropologists don't necessarily work as anthropologists, right? As professional, but they do all kinds of things. I have lots of students who've gone on to work in user research. I have students who've gone on to work in public health. I have students who've gone on to work as civil servants, students who work in journalism, quite a few. I've had students who then decided to come back and obviously continue studying. I have students who became doctors, medical doctors, and I have lots of students who've become lawyers. In particular, I even know which areas they work on: human rights, intellectual property rights, environmental law, etc. Right? The same goes for politics. As far as I can tell, the majority of students who graduate from politics end up going either into the civil service or studying law in the long run. I should say one thing, which is lots of anthropologists work in the city too. It's kind of quite a few. For some strange reason that I've never quite understood, we seem to be in high demand by people who need to know how other people think, and how people consume things. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is in sociology, you have roughly the same kinds of things: lots of civil servants, a lot of social work, and with anthropology, a lot of NGO and international organization work, right? Where so thinking back, I've been in Cambridge since 1999, and I've been teaching since I was a PhD student, so that's 20 years now, give or take. I've had lots of anthropology students. I have lots of anthropology students who've ended up working for the UN or working for NGOs. I have lots of politics students who've ended up working for the European Union, for the World Bank, etc. And the same goes for sociology. Those are institutions that are always on the lookout for people with the sort of training that the HSPS degree gives you. Right?
Thank you. Final question then, because I realize we're pretty much coming to the end of our time together. But someone's asked, for the SAQ, should we focus on specific aspects of anthropology, for example, ethnography, or is it better to overlap with stuff that appears on the UCAS statement and show another angle of interest on those topics? So with the supplementary box, I guess, is what they're referring to there.
Either will do. Some of the more interesting supplementary boxes I've ever seen have been of people actually telling me something that is quite unique and original, but equally being able to say, well, look, these are some of the things I know about the way in which Cambridge HSPS works, and this is what I would like to explore when I'm there, right? So it depends. It's up to you. It also, think about that supplementary paragraph as being in relation to what you've already written above, right? So whatever information you've put into the main box, the main text, where you introduce yourself, you say who you are, what you've been studying, and all those things, you've got that there. So that's a springboard in a way. Then you write that paragraph relationally, right? That paragraph speaks to something that's not quite there in the first bit. It kind of Alex knows this, one of my favorite expressions is the devil's in the detail. Well, that's the devil.
Yeah, I think just to lead on from what you said, the SAQ was actually actually tremendously helpful in like kind of, because HSPS is so unique, and you'll be applying to a range of courses. You'll be applying to straight politics courses or straight social, and so like just being able to kind of really dig at the multidisciplinary character of the degree is that SAQ really allows you to do that. I definitely recommend following that.
So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I have recorded this session, so hopefully we will be able to put up some form of edited version online on YouTube for you to refer back to in the future. And thank you so much to both Alex and Marta for being here and giving us your time. And hopefully some of you will be making an application to Homerton, so Marta gets to read your applications in October. That would be great. But if you have any further questions, don't be afraid to get in touch. We have our email is the access@homerton.cam.ac.uk. So we're able to pass on questions to HSPS Director of Studies, such as Marta, and then they might be able to get back to you as well. So thank you everyone for attending, and best of luck with your applications.